after World War II, this sort of whiteness expanded to include white Jews. And our definition of whiteness, because in America, race is constructed against anti-Blackness, right? Like, the whole conversation is like, where are we vis-a-vis anti-Blackness? And so Jews began to be allowed the systemic privileges of white people. In the very beginning of the 20th century, like 1903, I think, there was sort of the development of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, like the Tsarist secret police developed this pamphlet about the secret Jewish cabal. And that was really when it's the conversation, you know, right? And this is kind of the core of anti-Semitism. One core of anti-Semitism is this notion that we're secretly pulling the strings and running things from behind the scenes of this nefarious plot. That's when Jews started to be racialized. And so the Holocaust and, you know, like how much Jewish blood do you have was really a sort of biology. Judaism is race, Jewishness is race. So Jews have been racialized, right? And a lot of our oppression, the history of our oppression has this racial dynamic. And many Jews are white, particularly many Jews in America are white. There are Jews are also Black and Latinx and Indigenous and Asian and American and like, but many Jews are white, like myself. And while there was anti-Jewish discrimination in the first half of the 20th century was very racialized, right? We quotas on admission to college. There were with restriction to where we could live, right? Restrictions on where we could be working, right? You know, restaurants and hotels legally could bar Jews. They were called restricted places, right? So there was systemic oppression against us. But after World War II, this sort of whiteness expanded to include white Jews. And our definition of whiteness, because in America, race is constructed against anti-Blackness, right? Like, the whole conversation is like, where are we vis-a-vis anti-Blackness? And so Jews began to be allowed the systemic privileges of white people. So it's like, it's race and it's not race.
When you're talking about the racialization of Jews in America in the 20th century, what does that look like when all of a sudden an out-group comes to be perceived as an in-group?
The poll was set in the ground about anti-Blackness. And it's like, this has to be the racialized other. And then there's room for other communities to be able to collect white privilege. And because it, at a certain point, bolsters white supremacy to claim us, right? It's good for white supremacy to have more people on team not Black. You know, Jews didn't pick it. Like, it wasn't a choice, but things moved. And listen, you know, if we're talking about the 1950s, you've got a community of people whose parents were running from pogroms to get to America. And then they look and, you know, and they see Europe has just been devastated, right? 6 million Jews were just slaughtered across the country. Like, they have all of this trauma. And if somebody says, hey, now you can live in this suburb and be white and have the American dream and be safe, you know, Jews are like, okay, yes, that sounds good. And so many of them were willing to buy into the anti-Blackness because of their own trauma and their own, you know, both epigenetic and also lived, you know, and desire for safety. And, you know, Jews were disproportionately involved in the civil rights movement. Like, there were some Jews who were like, given our history, we know that we need to show up now in solidarity with anybody who's ever oppressed.
Jews in America having white privilege, but also Jews in America being the primary target of white supremacist and white nationalist hate. And so how does that work, right? Like, how does it work that on the one hand, you are, as a community, let into whiteness, but on the other hand, maligned by whiteness? I mean, that seems like a hard thing to understand.
So I think the best way to do this is to sort of pull back a little bit and go into, you know, go back 1,000 years and talk about how the way contemporary anti-Semitism got set up, and then I'll bring it into how this functions now. So in the Middle Ages, Jews living in Christian lands, which Jews were in all over the world, but when we were in Europe, we were often not allowed to own land. In some places, there was a stigma against money lending as a Christian problem, as like Christians didn't want to do it. It was usually it's sinful. And the Jews are like, we'll do it. We got no problem. Like, no, it's not an issue for us. And so even though we were oppressed, living in ghettos, taxed heavily, like money lending was convenient because we could help cover these ridiculous taxes that the king or whoever was in charge would put on us. It was liquid, so the next time they kick us out of their country, we had some money to go with us. It was a great safety net, but then very quickly, very, very quickly, Jews became conflated with this sort of money grubbing, money controlling trope. So the oppression against Jews that caused us to get into one line of work, and most of us were not doing this, then became the justification for a different kind of anti-Jewish oppression.